Hello, and welcome to our session at the 2023 IES Math Summit. It's a pleasure for our team from the Oregon Department of Education to join you today to provide an overview of our work on increasing access to high school math pathways in our state. My name is Andrew Byerly, and I have served as the Math Assessment Specialist at ODE since 2019. I'm joined by my two colleagues as we co-present today, and I'll have them give a brief introduction before we begin.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Kama Almasi. I'm a STEM education specialist with the Oregon Department of Education.
And hello, everyone. My name is Mark Freed. I'm math education specialist here. We work with standards and instructional materials at the State Department.
Central to the work that we do are the students we serve. So we want to begin by sharing a bit of who we are as a state. The Oregon Department of Education works in partnership with almost 200 school districts, 19 regional educational service districts, and countless community partners to foster equity and excellence for every learner. Together, we serve over 550,000 students and support over 81,000 school employees, including teachers, administrators, and classified staff. We believe every student should have access to a high-quality, well-rounded learning experience, and we work to ensure every student in Oregon graduates with a plan for their future. As Oregon's population increasingly diversifies, the systems that support our students must also diversify. Over the past several years, the performance of Oregon students on national and statewide academic achievement measures has plateaued. Empathy interviews have also shown that students are not only disengaged from their math education, but experiencing negative impacts on their mental and emotional health at the same time. It's time for a change. Our primary goal today is to provide an overview of the Oregon Math Project, which is an umbrella term for everything related to re-engineering an equitable system of math education for Oregon students. As part of this overview, we'll share how we've created high school math pathways in our state, as well as some of the lessons learned from the successes and challenges of our implementation so far. We'll have some time at the end for live Q&A, but please feel free to use the chat to ask questions as we go along. As we start, we'd like to invite each of you to carry through this session your own math story. Everyone has a story made up of the messages, experiences, mindsets, and dispositions from their journey as a math learner. Here are some questions to help you begin to reflect on your math story, and we'll pause throughout the session to give you the chance to continue to add detail to it. Feel free to grab a journal or a notepad to jot some thoughts down along the way. In addition to your math story, we encourage you to think also about the students you've taught or served across the arc of your career, whose stories can form the passion and power behind your own work. How have you experienced K-12 mathematics? Were you able to experience the joy, beauty, and wonder of math? What was a memorable moment, or who was a memorable teacher for you? And what brings you to this conversation? Our team at ODE has heard from several students in recent years whose stories represent a clear continuum of experiences. One high school student referred to his math journey as, quote, just doing time, as if learning math were a prison sentence. This is simply unacceptable and inhumane. And what's worse, he's not alone. On the other hand, we've heard from middle school students who report things like, I've always seen math as something we all just have to learn, but doesn't really apply. This is actually helping me. And, quote, it was cool to do math without feeling annoyed at it. This student voice, or one form of what Safir and Dugan call street data, is invaluable in our work of humanizing mathematics and keeping our focus on who our systems serve. The best guidepost we've found for reimagining math education has come from Uri Treisman and Shirley Malcolm over 30 years ago. They posited that, historically, math has filtered students out, particularly women and students of color, and offered an alternative. What if math functioned more like a pump that lifted students to opportunities and success? The high school student we quoted earlier was filtered out. The system failed him in that he believed he was not a math person and had little to no meaningful experience with mathematics. On the other hand, the middle school students we heard from were seeing math as relevant and useful, something that can ultimately lift them to connections and opportunities as they pursue their future. These two images of the pump and the filter best illustrate the work we're trying to do in Oregon, but they alone are not enough to build upon. The goal of the Oregon Math Project is to engineer a better system, one that provides meaningful math for every student. To engineer a system that serves as a pump, we must build on strong cornerstones. The 4 cornerstones of the Oregon Math Project are focus, engagement, pathways, and belonging. And over the rest of this session, we'll dive deeper into each of these cornerstones to provide specifics and key principles of our work. Let's start with some definitions. Focus is all about providing K-12 learning progressions that make sense to students and allow them to eventually make connections to their own goals and aspirations. Engagement seeks to create active learning experiences that allow students to engage in the joy and wonder of mathematics while seeing it as a useful tool with which to make sense of the world. Pathways recognizes that there are multiple ways to move through a study of mathematics rather than the one traditional track. Creating choice and agency for students is key to their long-term success. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, belonging acknowledges that engaging in mathematics is profoundly human, and students must ultimately see themselves as capable doers of math. So let's dive in now and take a closer look at each cornerstone.
Now that we have been introduced to the 4 cornerstones of the Oregon Math Project, I'd like to take the opportunity to share a little bit more about how we envision the work of focus in terms of learning progressions and high school pathways in our state. The structure of the next few sections will be to share more about how the work of a given cornerstone helps move the system from that historical filter to a more equitable design of a pump that moves all students along and can lift them to achieve their goals and aspirations. This work will be done through a series of shifts that we'll present in tables and highlight a few aspects of engineering's equitable system to focus on. You'll see these shifts at the top of the column headers from the historical filter system on the left column to the more equitable pump system in the right column. We'll also highlight 1 or 2 aspects of the work that you'll find in that middle blue column and then pause to give you time to reflect on areas and connect to the work you do. We encourage you to pause the video or review the slides as needed to take a closer look at these tables. For the cornerstone of focus, the key takeaway would be to shift the conversation from a historically course-focused system to one engineered around content-focused learning progressions. 2 areas I've been thinking about within this work is challenging some assumptions that courses designed in the 1890s titled Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2 could consistently provide a coherent and relevant learning progression to students today. Courses with the same title can actually vary quite a bit from district to district or even classroom to classroom and reflect the individual priorities of a teacher trying to replicate their math experience they were successful in when they were students, rather than choosing content to support a wide range of student interests. I've heard math stories from students that I would describe as a rush to Algebra 1 content and then repeat content somewhere in high school and college. This repetition could occur in the form of taking multiple courses, such as multiple Algebra 1 courses, or repeating content in algebra, geometry, and pre-calculus, or college algebra, or just taking calculus in both a high school and college setting. At some point, students find themselves repeating content. Here's some other areas we've been thinking about as we talk about engineering that focus system in our state. I'll pause for a moment here to give you a chance to read and reflect on what might resonate with your math story in the left column and what could be an area you could focus on in your context. So going back to the 2010 Common Core Standards Design, the authors set out to create a coherent K-8 learning progression to set students up for success in Algebra 1. And that was something we wanted to maintain as we reviewed and revised our Oregon standards. However, Using different domain titles in that document did not always clearly identify these learning progressions. So one change we did work on in our K-12 revised math standards was to name these learning progressions explicitly, like an algebraic reasoning progression or numeric reasoning or geometric reasoning. We were also intentional about creating a data reasoning progression that spanned K-12 based on the American Statistical Association GAZE 2 framework. Core high school content then serves as a capstone experience on these learning progressions and opens options for specialized third credit studies for students in grades 11 and 12. So examples of the impact of a capital C course focused system can be seen in our state laws. Within our graduation requirements, we named that students need to complete 3 credits of math at the Algebra 1 and above level. Another example of kind of thinking about moving forward with a lowercase content C focus would include engaging our 4-year public universities in Oregon to review the wording of our mission requirements, which is where you'll find that capital A Algebra 2 course named. I'm happy to report that agreements have been reached starting with the class of 2024 here, that public university admissions in Oregon would no longer name the Algebra 2 course specifically as a requirement. Rather, admission requirements are focused on 3 credits of high school math, including references to lowercase algebra, geometry, and data content. Certainly more work needs to be done within this focus cornerstone, but we certainly celebrate statewide shifts like this when they occur.
I'll delve into the cornerstone of engagement. We know that math learning happens when students are motivated to engage with relevant and meaningful issues in the world around them. This doesn't just mean applied math, and it doesn't mean word problems. And what is relevant and meaningful is unique to individual students and will require reflection and collaboration. It isn't just teachers, but counselors and others as well play a critical role in learning about individual students. So our collaborations must go beyond the individual classroom, where we design an engaging classroom. To improve engagement, we seek to move from a passive learning or passive engagement environment to one that is active. In Oregon, we're building opportunities for educators to learn high-quality instruction practice to deepen engagement. What does this look like? In the classroom, learners construct their knowledge individually and collaboratively with one another through meaningful and relevant tasks. On the educator side, we need to give high-quality feedback to students often that supports self-regulated or more conceptual learning, so learners actively extend and apply knowledge. When I reflect on my own math story, the nature of math stands out for me. I was particularly good at memorizing procedures and rules. It wasn't until many years later that I had deeper understanding of the usefulness of math and the creative ways in which we can interact with and contribute to math. Here are some other areas we've been working on in Oregon to engineer active rather than passive engagement in math education. So I'll pause for you to read and reflect on what resonates with your own math story. What might you want to center as you or your team move to improve engagement? A system that filters is cold and efficient. It puts students in rows and defines success as the repeating of what the teacher demonstrates or expounds. You can see this in the classroom from 100 years ago. Well, chalkboards may change to overheads, which can change to whiteboards, but fundamentally, the questions we ask, the visions of what a math class should look like, and who is seen as successful have changed very little over the past 130 years. A system that moves students along like a pump may look messy by comparison. The Oregon Math Project is applying the ideas of high-quality teaching practice in which all students engage with authentic math tasks through discourse and collective problem solving. In the photos on the right, we see students actively engaged in math. The top center photo, for example, shows students using LED lights to learn systems of equations. While this can look like hands-on activities, Engaging and ambitious math classes also include discourse and collaboration. In the bottom photo, for example, we see a math class at MIT. In the classroom with whiteboards, but it looks very different from the traditional classrooms as students talk and move and problem solve together. This is what math can be, a deep dive into useful and relevant math with connections to careers and social issues that students care about. Collaborative learning is the norm and the necessity. We were able recently to make site visits to high school classrooms where math pathways and ambitious math pedagogy have been implemented. The level of engagement is high in these classes. We repeatedly heard from students how relevant the work is to their futures and that this is the best math class they've ever taken.
The next part of the presentation, I'll share a little bit more about how we envision engineering equitable math systems through reimagined high school math pathways. Whenever I think about conversations around pathways, I think it's important to talk about the idea of tracks and paths together, that the goal will be moving from a system built around tracking practices to one built around pathway options. A track to me is like a one-dimensional line through a predetermined course sequence whose only options for students is really to move faster or slower on the track. Whereas a path is defined by 2 points where the line is intentionally connecting those 2 points together. Coherent pathways need to be engineered that connect core high school content to a variety of post-secondary options students may be interested in. I see student choice as an important consideration as well as we talk about tracks and paths. Placement within a tracking system is often outside the student's control and determined by a teacher, a counselor, or maybe even a test cutoff score. Whereas with pathways, the roles of schools is to consider course options that students would be interested in taking, and then providing students with the agency to choose options that they would like to take that align to their interests. Here's some other ways we've been thinking about the work of engineering equitable pathway options to be more responsive to students' needs and interests. I'll pause one more time here to reflect on what resonates with your math stories in the left column, an area that you might want to focus on, that you can focus on in your context. As I think about students' math stories navigating our math system, I have questions. Questions like how many students really do take algebra, geometry, and algebra 2 in 3 years, or are there other options? And what would a diagram look like if we try to map out these pathways? In Oregon, we do collect course enrollment data at the student level. So I work with data specialists here to come up with a model to answer some of these questions. And this is the image we came up with. What we found was kind of a mess. Rather than a simple A to B to C journey, it's quite complex. So what you're looking at here is that top row would include all the course options we found for 8th grade students in 2016, down to that same cohort of students of the courses they were taking in grade 11 in 2019. Green arrows indicate progress and moving to a higher course path, and red arrows indicate students did not make progress, such as repeating the same course. And percentages indicate the number of students that move from one course to the next along a given arrow. I see this as a reality for our students and families to navigate. A virtual Plinko game where we drop students at the top and hope for the best as they move the levels down. And a simplified course progression and a school catalog that only includes algebra, geometry, and algebra 2 hides this complexity and keeps us from understanding the system that students are actually navigating. The best estimate of students who complete algebra, geometry, and algebra 2 in this analysis by grade 11 would be somewhere in the 40 to 50% range. This means a majority of students took at least one course in a sequence that they probably didn't see in a course catalog. Moving forward, we like to engineer an equitable system intentionally designed around 3 pathway options. On the surface, this system may look more complex than we might normally see, but in reality, it's actually a simpler model than the one students are currently navigating. The model we identified here in Oregon we refer to as the 2+1 course model. This would include 2 credits of core content beyond grade 8 standards and balance that instruction between about a credit's worth of algebra content, a half a credit data, and a half a credit geometry. After this, +1 third credit options would fall within 3 pathways. One pathway could lead to calculus, which describes our current system, And we would like to add additional options within a data path and a quantitative path that could include courses such as construction geometry or financial algebra. The work we'll be doing in the coming years will include collaborating with teachers to engineer paths that connect high school content to post-secondary outcomes. Regardless of the course, our goal will be to create options where all students sees math as relevant and places where they belong.
All cornerstones really support this fourth, an essential one for equity, that of belonging. When education professionals attend to the needs of all students, when we create an asset-based attitude in classroom, when we foster math identity for all learners, learners come to feel that they belong in this classroom and see themselves as capable doers of math. An important part of belonging and equity is helping students build a math identity. That is, believing that one is and is perceived by others to be a math learner, believing that one can do math, seeing math as part of one's life. So what can we as math education professionals do to help students build a math identity? We can work to dismantle bias and stereotypes while helping students build a growth mindset and math identity with an asset-based, positive classroom climate that holds high expectations, honors mistakes, and encourages positive collaboration. Focusing on the standards for math practices, focusing on growth mindset, and teacher support in building identity are crucial. These points I just made are actually in a set of training modules from IES at the U.S. Department of Ed on helping students and teachers build a sense of belonging in math identity. I put a link to this website, their website, in the slide notes, and I'll drop these in the chat. As I mentioned, we want to move teachers and students from a fixed to a growth mindset. An educator who holds high expectations and has asset-based attitudes in class helps students persevere through challenges and see themselves as doers of math, and that's really where a sense of belonging comes about. For those categories in this middle column, identity really resonates with me personally. I discussed it in the previous slide, and I want to note that with growth mindset lens, educators can foster math identity in their classroom and will recognize and draw upon students' strengths, as well as their cultural and linguistic funds of knowledge. Identity has been especially important to me as I think about my students. As we in Oregon move from the filter on the left to the pump on the right, these areas we've been working on in Oregon to engineer belonging in math classrooms. I'll pause for you to read and reflect on what resonates with your own math story. What might you want to center as you or your team moves to build math identity and improve engagement? Having a math identity alone does not create the sense of belonging by itself in the classroom. Research reveals some important points. First, belonging and student success are higher for all students in heterogeneous classrooms. We must interrogate tracking practices with an equity lens and dismantle these systems to ensure that all students develop a sense of belonging in richly diverse classrooms. Changing classroom strategies to differentiate and deepen learning can also help our students build their social emotional learning skills, construct positive math identities, and engage with more relevant and open-ended math learning. No matter what, we are always teaching students with diverse needs and interests. So let's engage in practices that open options and opportunities and build belonging. In addition, educators and specialists must go beyond that quip, "We are all math people," and reflect on ways for students to experience and internalize that understanding. The process should include and involve diverse voices, and education professionals must critically examine how cultural norms and classroom structures reinforce ideas about who is a math person. Finally, an integral piece that is bolstered by research is that students thrive when they engage with challenging and meaningful opportunities to learn.
We'd like to finish today by sharing some of our challenges and successes. And to be clear, systems reform is adaptive work. It takes vision, time, and resource. We believe that sustainable change is possible, but it's certainly hard work. One early success has been in the communication of the 2+1 course model and the cornerstones themselves. These are now very recognizable across the state among educators and leaders. Another success has been the involvement of many Oregon educators over the past few years, not just in standards revision and professional learning, but also in our collaboration with other community partners such as higher education. There's been an intentional connection between math and other content areas, both within the Oregon Department of Education and within districts. One really interesting and unique connection that we're making is between math and our social and emotional learning standards. Some of the challenges that we've seen are the communication of details of the Oregon Math Project to a wider audience. It's great that we've got a recognizable model and cornerstones, but there's a lot of details that drive the work for educators and leaders alike. There are limited course options so far within the state that align with Oregon's Math Pathways model. We're working to create additional course frameworks, to curate and implement courses that are already built, and designing some course models ourselves. Finally, there's a challenge in pushing through some structural inertia. Almost all of us that are working for change in Oregon have been a part of that system that works like a filter. So having to reimagine the system and participate in the re-engineering is really tough work. One final point we'd like to make, the work of the Oregon Math Project is much more than just standards and courses. We're working with partners across the state to provide professional learning opportunities around ambitious teaching, as well as grading practices that support student learning. We know that instruction, assessment, and grading practices are key elements of students' daily experience, and we share Tyler Rablin's wondering about how these systems would look if our sole goal was to help students achieve their highest potential. As we end our session, here is a slide of key takeaways and a reminder that our work is to reimagine and re-engineer a system that historically filters students to one that serves as a pump, lifting them to their goals. We're building this system on the cornerstones of focus, engagement, pathways, and belonging. Thank you so much for your engagement and attention today, and we look forward to continuing this journey, learning from many of you along the way.
Wanting to share ASSM, and yes, definitely. I'm sharing it. I'm actually today at the CCSSO SCAS meeting. Is where I'm in the lobby, and we're sharing our math pathways as a topic here as well. So certainly open to sharing other states, learning from our experience here.
And we see your note too, Robin. That was a pretty funny slide. And yeah, we've been working with other states as well, connecting with them a little bit, and it's pretty complicated. Thanks, Sarah.
Hopefully we'll see that slide clean up in the next 10 years as we'll see those three pathways emerge. We'll keep on tracking it. The data has been a little interrupted with the COVID years when we didn't track data for a couple school years, but we have plans to continue that model and see as one outcome that we're going to monitor as we look at pathways being more organized around the three different pathway student options they have.
And meanwhile, Mark, I don't know if you see David's.
Yeah, I see a question from David, but David's question is how did you trim the standards or decide what standards would be in versus what were for all students? We had a 2-year process where we worked on our K-12 math standards, and the high school group. We went in with some assumptions. One was we like our K-8 standards, so we're going to assume that we're going to kind of keep K-8 standards and moving forward. We adopted Common Core, so our K-8 standards are still consistent with that. And so the question we posed to our high school
team was assuming that students were proficient in all the K-8 standards, how much more beyond that would students need to be ready for the variety of different college and career options they may have afterwards. And so I kind of framed it as I like metaphor. So I think of a shopping cart, an empty shopping cart that we gave our content panel, and the aisles were the Common Core high school standards. And I just asked them to go up and down and put content in there that they thought was essential for all students. And then we just kind of stopped when it filled up 2 years. So that's how we got to like 27 algebra standards, because that seemed like about a year's worth of content. And so that standards are not in our high school. There's a lot of really important standards that we recognize that are important for preparing calculus, but I think it was important to be realistic for our teachers to say, like, this is when we say year of algebra and we're going to give you a year of algebra standards, that we use that. So I think of our high school standards as a subset of the Common Core then that we agreed on. And I think that in terms of pathways standards, we don't have standards for pathways right now. So I think that's kind of what we're working on. I think we're holding space for 1114 pathways, and I think that we recognize as a shared space with higher education. So whatever we do in there, we want to be collaborative with higher education partners. So one thing that's going to happen in the next 2 years is aligning pre-calculus courses in K-12 and higher ed. College algebra is going to be renamed pre-calculus here in Oregon, and it has a set of standards that the higher education adopted. So we have something we can work with in terms of saying, like, this is what pre-calculus is in post-secondary. Let's bring this in K-12 and let's align our systems around this idea of pre-calculus. So I think that is one way we're going to kind of align a really important course in terms of that. And I think the other pathways of conversations are either we like to have that course be a 100 level course, like Math 105 is a quantitative reasoning course here that we offer in high school, or it's preparing you for a 100 level course. So let's look at the prerequisites of that course and make sure that whatever +1 course we're creating would prepare a student for one of the 100 level options they would see when they graduate.
That was a great question. And thanks, Mark. And David has a follow-up about, for all of us really, about pushback. That is something that we've been thinking a lot about, and I'll let Mark or Andy tackle that. But we're anticipating some, but we are trying to get ahead of it with communication toolkit and other work.
I guess my response in terms of that is like it's been a long journey for us. We've been talking about it for 10 years. So having time to work through this has been good. We started with taking this to the teachers, K-12 teachers, higher ed, professors, who've been actually really supportive of it. I've been pleasantly surprised this last decade. They've been, when we present options of making specialized math courses or reimagining math systems, the teachers have been very supportive of it. Another partner that's been early in the conversation was CTE, CTE programs, CTE teachers. They've been very supportive. Business and industry has been very supportive. The pushback I've so far has been, I think, around just making sure we have an option for students to take calculus. And I think we've always tried to communicate that's always been a pathway. So we're not trying to take away a pathway calculus. We're just trying to add to. And I think that's helped mitigate some of those potential pushback conversations.
Thanks. And Robin has Shakia. So awesome that you're here. Thanks for joining us. And Robin has a note too. Last month at NCS Stats DC, it seemed that other states were still doubling down on acceleration in middle school. So you're planning to share this out. That's awesome. Thanks. We appreciate that. And feel free to reach out to us. I'll drop our emails in the chat in a few minutes too. Yeah, we're wrapping it up in a couple minutes. So. Looks like Dewey has a question. How and what did you communicate to teachers, counselors, and parents to convey the message that third-year options are not tracking? I love the 3 options you've provided. We're considering something similar in our state, but some concerns have been expressed that a QR course would end up being a dumping ground. We definitely hear that message. And we haven't released our communications toolkit. It's still in draft form, but it's close. And Mark, do you want to address that a little bit?
Yeah, I think in terms of tracking, talking about tracking and paths together. If I talk about pathways, I try to talk about tracking. And the way I think about tracking being it's a predetermined single path that you go, and the only options you have is to go faster or slower on this track. Where a path, in order to be a path, you need to have a starting point and end point. And so for any of the paths, I think we want to present this idea that like let's be explicit, let's name the starting point, let's name the goal. And so we're going to intentionally connect these two dots, and that's how we make a path. And I think that's in the design phase, so people know where this path leads to. So starting with our high school algebra standards and going to calculus, let's build a path that connects these two very intentionally. So I think that makes sense. And I think the other option is important is when I think about +1 courses, really the only prerequisite for a +1 is that you took a core 2. So you could take two +1s concurrently, you can take them in different orders, students can explore, but ultimately all the pathways would lead to at least one or more options for students post-secondary. And so I think as long as that is where they're heading to, people feel better about that exploration phase and that 11-14 kind of phase space.
Okay, well, we are wrapping it up. And so we want to thank you again for joining us and participating. And just in case, I will put our contacts in. Oh, I can't. That's right. Okay, but hopefully you got our contact info off of the slides. Thanks again for joining us, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the summit.
Thank you.